I finally decided to create a video explaining in details my current experience with EU5. I recently reached over 200 hours in this game, so of course I'm still not a total expert, but I'm getting a grasp of this game. And a big chunk of these hours is my one full campaign from 1337 until 1805, so almost 500 years of experience playing as the Ottomans. I want to talk you through what's the Ottomans flavor, what's the Ottomans experience, and if I had fun playing it. And at the end I will also talk a bit about some of the issues of the game versions that I played on and what feedback I left on it, and also how some of these issues were already fixed in a patch just a few days ago. First of all, for general Ottomans content, they start with 190 dynamic historical events. That's one of the highest numbers in game, as well as 44 other pieces of content like unique laws, estate privileges, government reforms, and advances. They do also own one unique situation, which is about rise of the Ottomans. I'm gonna talk about a bit later, but this is a massive amount of the content, and if you compare it to like EU4 with all of the DLCs, I think Ottomans have like 150 dynamic historical events, and this is counting all of the events coming from their mission tree. There are autumn deals going on right now on eneba.com, so if you're planning to buy any games in the coming days, think about me and eneba.com and check link in the video description as well as a pinned comment to support the channel while getting some cool discounts. So you see, the Ottomans start pretty small. They are much smaller than in EU4 and they're much smaller than their neighbor Byzantium. But at the same time, in this period of history, that was a very quick rise and expansion of the Ottomans to take whole Anatolia and of course get into the Balkans. In EU5, in 1337, they start with only 680,000 pops living in 23 locations, so kind of provinces from EU4. They have 65 base tax, which I think it might be content like kind of development from EU4, but development in EU4 doesn't like take into account autonomy. Base tax does take into account control, and it's only 17 of income. And once you play around with the sliders of your income, you have only around 2 balance if you fully invest into your legitimacy and stability, which is important in that game. They also start with 200 of standing army, which is pretty much nothing, but keep in mind in early game, most of your wars will be done via levies. Now it's not visible here, but technically they are called Beylik of the Ottomans at the very start of the game, and later through the expansion you can get a title of Kingdom of the Ottomans, and once you go for the rise of the Ottoman situation, you can become the Ottoman Empire. So let's start with their government, because their unique government, well, it's actually half unique, is Anatolian Beylik, so that's the government that all of the Beyliks in Anatolia are having. It's giving you some nice bonuses like unjustified wars on the same religion cost. This is a free guarantee form, so it doesn't take any space. You can still take some default guarantee forms. You get +1 cabinet seat, which is very important because most of your actions in game are being done via the cabinet members. And finally, it is also increasing your non-cultural levy size, which is very important because in this age, in this year, most of the pops living in Anatolia are not the Turks, it's Greeks. And it's gonna take you a lot of time to, convert or assimilate all of these Greeks and make them your own culture. So at the very start, giving that non-cultural levy size is super helpful for the Ottomans, especially that you cannot accept the Greek culture. It is by default discriminated in your country. They also start with one unique privilege for their nobility called Ghazi Lords, which gives you additional morale of armies and increased even further levy size. Like all of the Muslims, they also have access to Zimi, which is obviously an estate just like in EU4 that is giving you plenty of different stuff, but most importantly, you can stack a lot of heathens tolerance, but it also increases your culture's capacity and national unrest. I know people often cry that, oh, why there's no national ideas in this game? Where they are, they just moved into the advances, and the Ottomans start with 5 different advances unlocked day 1. So you might call it traditions from EU4, like, and these are the advances that you have unlocked at the start of the game in the age of traditions. And they're getting access to a unique subject type that is called Uch Bey. This is an army-based country that is supposed to take care of your borders. They have 33% integration speed. Just like co-creation costs from EU4, you just integrate provinces much faster. They get 5% discipline. They get access to slave rate efficiency. And they also get bonus to their total sailors and manpower. Of course, there's not much manpower day 1 because you don't really have buildings for it, except one. But over time it's gonna be very useful. Same for the sailors. As Ottomans, you see the region they're playing on, a navy will be very important to keep your naval presence, to get actual control of the ports and the trade. So how the early game works for the Ottomans, where to replicate their fast expansion, they have fast historical expansion, you have a situation, which is much more powerful than some mission tree giving you claims, perma claims for conquering lands. The rise of the Turks situation is a dynamic situation because it's not like it's only for the Ottomans. It's the strongest beylik in Anatolia that is gonna be like the main target of that situation, but all the other beyliks will be also involved. So that main target of the situation, the strongest beylik, by default the Ottomans, is gonna get events that is speeding up your integration of the locations and provinces. I think it's 20% speed up on each event, and you get a lot of these events. That helps just integrate the whole Anatolia much faster, together with that advance that I mentioned earlier. You get events to vassalize the other beyliks that are smaller, and you get them a lot. Like in early game, I was just getting that for some smaller beyliks around me, but later when I pretty much united whole Anatolia outside of the Karamanids, I even got an event to get Karamanids as my vassal, but at that point I was much stronger. And then we have plenty of unique CTAs that you can click in the situation, like you can get claims on the other beyliks by just spending some money on that. You can create the special subject types that I mentioned, the Uchpeish. You can create fortresses through the base. You can get some interactions with Byzantium to get improve relations with them. On top of that, you get dynamic historical events as well to force them to pay you money for keeping them alive. You can get 4 defense in the areas. You can actually get an alliance with the other beyliks in exchange for location. You get that location. Or if a beylik is in a civil war, you can intervene in that civil war to just invade that beylik. Besides Anatolia Beylik guarantee form, we also start with what's called Legacy of the Osman guarantee form, that is giving you increased max control plus 10%. This is one of the strongest bonuses that you can get in-game because, you know, control just impacts so much stuff like your base tax, your economy, your trades, how much you get from the buildings. This is super important. It's hard to get control over your locations early game, and that plus 10 max control helps a lot. You get another 25% speed of integration. So you get minus 33% advances. You get events for the rise of the Ottomans, and then you get from Legacy of Osman guarantee form another 25%. This also doesn't take a guarantee form slot. It gives you yet another cabinet seat, so you start with 2 additional on top of the 2 that you have by default. You get minus 33% antagonist received, so it's AE impact, to speak in EU4 terms, really strong, and you can raid enemies for slaves. It's pretty straightforward mechanic because you occupy a location, you get some of its pops as the slaves. And you keep that guarantee form pretty much as long as that situation Legacy of Turk is ongoing. And you might ask, okay, how and when is this situation ending? This situation will end either where it's at least 1400, you have at least 100 locations and no other beyliks are alive, or if you cannot get rid of all of the beyliks, you can end it either at 1565, flat date, or when you reach 500 locations, with 50 of them being urban. But the problem is, in the version that I played, there was a bug where I deleted all of the Beyliks, I got rid of them, but the situation was just not ending, which is actually in my advantage, because you want to keep that situation going as long as possible, because you keep the legacy of Ottoman government reform and you keep all of the mechanics from the situation. You lose them when the situation ends. You want to keep it as much as possible, so pretty much until you reach 500 of locations. But how I did that, I will get to this soon. Having all of this in mind, my early game expansion was simply uniting Anatolia, not even touching Byzantines early on, because they have some strong allies and a lot of Levies themselves. So let me actually draw you what I conquered first. So here my expansion was blocked pretty much on the Karmans. And same around here. I also conquered lands or about here. So Anatolia, you see, it got majority of it. I didn't get Karmans because they got allied by the Mamluks with 3-4 times more posts than the Ottomans, so I couldn't compete Levies versus Levies. I had to actually wait to unlock the standing army, which is not that easy early on. You have to get a special advance in Age of Renaissance, and it was the same here with the Red Knights that ended up being a subject of Jelarids, so the horde with also a lot of the armies. So that was my expansion in Anatolia. As mentioned earlier on, I also didn't really expand into Byzantines. I decided to do that in early 1400s, so I ended up taking this chunk of the Thrace, as well as all of the provinces around here from Greece. So with all of this conquered by 1450, you see I increased my amount of the pops to 3.5 million, so that's a quite decent increase. I had 194 locations. By that time, also annexed all of the subjects that I got through the events. 429 base tax, which of course comes from amount of the pops, amount of the locations. But more importantly, it's not about taking locations, but how much you control them. 200 of income, I think that's the biggest improvement, and 70 of balance this way. And you see, even at this point, after over 100 years of gameplay, my standing army was only 3,500. So there was still not enough to compete at any level with the Mamluks. So, you know, because of that, I had to focus at this point to play really tall. And I also probably made a mistake by attacking the Byzantines a bit too slow, because all of these lands got split by the European powers. There was Papal State over here, there was 2 Sicilies over here, Provence over here. We also had chunks owned by Bulgaria, Bohemia, and even Aragon. Everyone just jumped into the Byzantines because I was too slow. What kind of advances the Ottomans have in Age of Renaissance, which starts shortly after the game start and ends in like 1430. You get building cost, you get cultures capacity. So building cost, obviously important to scale. Cultures capacity allows you to accept cultures. Well, you assimilate cultures pretty fast as the Ottomans, and most of the lands that you conquer early on are the Greeks, which you can't accept. So that cultures capacity is useless early on, but once you start expanding outside of Anatolia, it's going to be very important, because you have to keep in mind that even if you integrate a province that you conquered, so a kind of core, it's just integrated. To have it fully cored, which gives you massive bonuses, for example, 20% max control, to have it fully cored, it needs to be your culture, at least 50% of the pops, or it needs to be your accepted culture. And cultures capacity handle that. How many cultures you can tolerate, and that helps with unrest, or accept, and that helps with having it fully cored. But on top of that, also another heathen's tolerance, on top of what you get from Zimi, garrison growth and general force maintenance. Another discipline in Age of Traditions, right? Access to Janissary barracks, which is a good source of manpower from heathens. Janissary guards, special units. There will be plenty of special units you'll be getting. Another speed of integration. Prestige. as well as CAF power, so kinda CAF compatibility and CAF cost. A few notes what I've been doing from 1450, where my income was really strong, especially from the trade. And it's worth mentioning that that income and balance is with taking zero money from taxes from Ulama, because the more loyal they are, the bigger bonus you get for the research speed, so how many advances you can take. So for small money investment, you can just get the advances faster, so I was getting zero tax from them. All of these lands were fully integrated, and outside of this 194 locations, 30 were already urban. At that time it was mostly towns, so a bit higher than the rural and much below the cities. And it's mostly because I didn't really fully understand yet at this point of the campaign what's the difference between town and city. And to explain that to you in a very straightforward way, both are urban locations and allow you to build urban buildings, but city gives you much better bonuses than the town. So you want ideally all of the provinces that are urban to be cities. As for the infrastructure, I was building some roads, but it was mostly roads that were following the rivers. There's plenty of rivers in Anatolia, and it's because obviously road helps you out with the proximity to capital, which then impacts your control. And like the roads can be followed also by pond canals, I think that's the name, as well as bridges, which gives you another bonus to your proximity. So this way I was keeping really strong control on all of the locations around here, like 4 or 5 locations outside of my capital, and not bad controls all around here. What I still didn't understand yet at this point is like how maritime presence works. And to give you a general explanation, maritime presence is like keeping your ships around the sea, and you can have objectives for the ships to do that themselves, and even the ships even will split and jump around the different locations to achieve that. The maritime presence goes from 0 to 100, and at 100 it gives you big bonuses to your proximity to the capital. So this way you can achieve really high control on all of the port locations. I didn't understand that yet at this point, and I think I started understanding that after 1450. By 1494 our borders looked more like this, because we were after first conflict with the Mamluks, and we got an event to vassalize Karmans. That helped a lot, because Karmans were still allied to the Mamluks. So for this event I could simply avoid fighting the Mamluks for this, and I could just fight Mamluks for the lands around here. For that first war of the Mamluks, I did prepare over 15,000 of regular armies, which is the crucial part, on top of around 50,000 levies that had to use to destroy the Mamluks. Just to put you the numbers into perspective, I had to kill around 300,000 of their levies to win that war. It was a very bloody war that we managed to win. So by 1944 we've got these borders. Let me show what kind of statistic it means. By 1494 we got another over 2 million of pops. The locations increased to 259. That is also 917 base tax. So you see that base tax did increase a lot. Since I had very strong economy, I could start investing that on a lot of buildings and buildings and buildings and buildings. That's out of more base tax, combined with increased control over these provinces, almost 400 of income and 113 of balance. And as you see, the standing army is over 15,000. We also defeated the Jalarids to get the Eretnits. So at this point, especially with that peace deal, I got rid of all of the Beyliks before 1500. But as mentioned, the situation didn't end because it was having a bug around it. At this moment I also started automating my trade. Remember, the game has automations, so I leveraged it to just handle the trade for myself. There was just too much of micromanagement at this point, and I didn't want to waste time on that. I still was focused on getting the buildings done, RGOs and the infrastructure, but the automation I left it for the AI to handle, and my trading I was really strong with that. Out of all of these locations, 56 were urban, so I was also increasing amount of the cities and towns. And Ottomans have another 6 unique advances in that age, which is 2.5% trade efficiency, 10% admin efficiency, and admin efficiency works differently in that game. It is pretty much how fast you change your guarantee forms, or change your laws. I think that's the most important parts. Another proximity cost, which helps with the control over the provinces. 20% improved relations that worked well with the antagonist bonus from the situation. Another 2 special units. For infantry, it was Janissary arquebusiers, replacing the old Janissaries. And for the cavalry, we got a Kinchilar. And then we also got 1 flat cultures capacity. Again, not important at this point yet, but it was about to start being important before my expansion to Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. Just a few decades later, we did end up finishing the whole situation and forming the Ottoman Empire. So by 1550, let me show you our borders. Now, they're not gonna be beautiful, but this is what we managed to conquer. So you see, we did get a bit into Bulgaria, and we got even more into Greece. But still, these few provinces here, these few locations were taken by the Provence Papal State, 2 Sicilies, as well as Aragon. And all of them, you know, being allied to some major powers, it was impossible to defeat. Anatolia was fully cleared. I also got the island of Cyprus, and I did take a big chunk of Syria, as well as pretty much fully annexed Iraqi provinces. So my borders looked pretty much like this. Pretty good, huh? And since there's a lot of pops in Syria and Iraq, trust me, a lot of pops, you see my population by 1548 increased over 13.5 million, and it was exactly 500 locations that I needed to end the situation. My base tax was almost 2,000, and that brought me 860 of income, as well as 200 balance and 30,000 of standing army. So still at this point of the game, while having a decent sized standing army, I was still using a tiny bit of levies, but that was slowly the moment where I started just doing the standing armies, unless there was a really big enemy like the Mamluks, where I had to bring more of quantity. Now, a big problem of forming the Ottoman Empire is you lose the legacy of Osman reform. A reminder, that was giving you like a cabinet seat, max control, speed of integration, antagonists received. And that's a huge loss, right? So that's why I'm thinking that actually getting rid of this bonus is just making it not worth it. That's why I want to ideally keep a Beylik alive until you reach 500 locations, so you can take advantage of that bonus as long as possible. So in replacement of that huge bonus that you just lost, you're getting a new reform, legacy of the Ottomans, not Osman, which gives you 25 cultures capacity. Very useful to get all of these cultures accepted. So I had full course here pretty much immediately after integrating the provinces. You can still raid religious enemies for slaves. It still doesn't take a guarantee form. And then on top of that, you unlock another guarantee form, Pashas, which is increasing the noble's power, but in exchange you're getting a cabinet seat, the one that you lost by losing the guarantee form, a legacy of Osman. You see, my balance is not that good compared to the previous one, even though my income increased a lot. And this is because I was like, oh, I can colonize West Africa. Wow, there's nobody there. Let me get the colonies, because it's surely gonna work like in EU4. It doesn't. It doesn't. Because to establish a colony, it really much depends on a lot of the factors, but most importantly, how many pops live there already. And since in West of Africa there's so many pops, I've wasted, at that point it was like, I think 150, 200 ducats a month that I was paying for trying to colonize the whole Gold Coast, a few provinces. And I was just going nowhere. I just got one island colonized. And that was actually helpful because thanks to that island, later I could start colonizing the New World because I had the colonial range. But I wasted so much time and resources, which on what ended up being a dead end. And that's also an issue with the current patch, that a lot of AIs do that. They go into the colonies and spend a lot of money on these colonies without getting an advantage, because you can also colonize lands of other nations if they are lower rank than you. But usually it's at a dead end because of the amount of the population. You might maybe snipe some locations with low population, but it's really not something that AI is doing. AI is just wasting money on that. This is also Age of Reformation, and there's another 5 advances that are unique for the Ottomans in that age. Stab invested cost, new special units, Janissary Musketeers, minus 20% army attrition, very useful, and a legal policy that you unlock that's called Kanun I Osmani, which gives you tax efficiency, but more importantly proximity cost. So you can already see that Ottomans is all about stacking integration speed and proximity cost. For example, in general, the meta in that game is to create a lot of subjects so they integrate for you. Well, Ottomans don't really need subject. They integrate everything fast themselves. You have enough cabinet seats for that. And then you also get diplomat capacity, but I wasn't using it at all. I was pretty much not having any subjects. So my control was really strong, like around 7 locations away from the capital, which is like, I think everything around here had like at least 80% of control. Then all of the harbors also had really strong control, like probably 60-70%, depending obviously how far away it was. The issue was, because I've lost the Legacy of Osman bonus from the guarantee form, I've lost 10% max control that was over there. So my actual economy like plummeted because of this loss of control, but it was fun. At this point I also become a great power, and remember, only great powers can be hegemons, and hegemons is not a button that you click like in EU4, but instead it's being automated depending who is the strongest specific area. I first became a cultural hegemon because I had so many artists, so much art, but more importantly, my culture was just super strong. Since I had all of this being Turks, there was almost no Greeks anymore. So that was the first one. That hegemon is really nice because you get a cabinet action to assimilate, so change the culture in the whole area instead of just a specific province like by default. Later on I was also a military hegemon for huge parts of the game. I was fighting with the AAR Emperor of Bohemia, which had massive amount of the armies, but in late game of course was just far ahead of them. Mid-late game also became economic hegemon for highest income, but it was hard to beat the sultanates in India with much higher income. And naval hegemon was like easy because it only counts heavy ships. AIs usually don't build heavy ships. The only one that I think I never got is the diplomatic hegemon because it takes into account the diplomatic reputation, which I didn't even stack. For the next 100 years, I was pretty much focusing on keeping good borders and expanding within the region. So let me update you the map. Yeah, this armor lands by 1640. So this is already 300 into the game, and I got something that you can do in EU4 in like a decade, right? Or even like a decade. But you see the like general difference in economy and expansion, and like in general how strong the country was. It's really strong. 26 million pops, almost 700 locations, 6,000 base tax. So I only got 200 new locations, and in the meantime I almost tripled my base tax. Same for the income, 2.7 thousand. Balance was already over 1,000 because I stopped spending money on the colonies in Western Africa, and see my standing army at this point was pretty much standing army, 160,000. But also it's important in the mid game is how they change with the your regiments. Remember, regiments are dynamic depending on the unit type and the age. Because over time when you unlock the unit types, the new unit types for advances, they have higher regiment size. So early on infantry is like 200 regiment size, but then it is I think 500, 800, 1,000 and even over 2,000 in the late game. And like cavalry is usually like a fourth of it, so when it's 200 for infantry, it's 50 for cavalry, same for artillery, so it really depends on a lot of factors. But one of the main reasons why my standing army increased from 30,000 to 160,000 is regiment size, but of course also how many armies I simply had, and I was purely using the standing armies instead of levies, and that was giving me a huge advantage. Because actually most of AIs either had very little of standing army or not at all. So the wars were like 3 wins every single time because I was finding standing army versus a mixed army or just Levi's army. At this point I was also still afraid of the coalition, so I didn't expand hard in Europe. You see, I just cleared Bulgaria, Serbia. There's also plenty of small Europeans left here that I didn't kill yet. I will just focus on this lands over here. And because I thought coalition might actually destroy me, so I was expanding slowly in Europe and going more full all in into the Muslims. What's important, all of these were my full course because I was accepting cultures or assimilating the cultures. 43% of my population in this land were Turks because I was assimilating so much, and I only had 8 out of 11 diplomatic capacity used, so he still had some slots to accept more of the cultures. I think the average control was around 60, new roads were being unlocked, new buildings that give you some flat bonuses, so I was leveraging them. This is also when Age of Absolutism started, where you have another 4 advances as the Ottomans, new unit types, Janissary line infantry. You get 10% max burghers literacy, and literacy is helpful to get advances faster, 2.5% trade efficiency, and minus 20% nobles power. Important later to increase your crownland. At this point I also decided to fully automate production and RGO's construction. I was just overwhelmed by the amount of demand that I had and the amount of micromanagement on this, and I only was turning it off from time to time to save money and build infrastructure like roads, pond canals, bridges, universities, libraries, just the key infrastructure was in my hands when I left AI everything else, which was also problematic because AI usually shits with forts everywhere. That's a problem in that patch. And you can't get it out of automation, the forts. So that's also why 100 years later for the late game I came back to build everything myself again, because there was just too many forts from the automation. In this age of absolutism you also get 2 important situations. One is Little Ice Age, which is making a lot of problems with food in a lot of provinces, and a lot of negative events about the food, which is really nice content compared to just some price changes to the goods like in EU4. And then you also get Court and Country, because as absolutist you actually unlock absolutism, which is a slider, associated value between absolutism and I don't even remember the name, let me check it, between absolutism and liberalism, where max absolutism gives you crown power, revoke privilege costs, but it decreases the estate's satisfaction, while liberalism is giving you culture's capacity, 20%, estate satisfaction, and it's easier to pass stuff in the parliament. So I decided to go through this disaster. I had to go through this disaster, but I decided to go into absolutism. So stuck in the absolutism, I had to revoke about 70% of my privileges, and every revoke costs you stability a lot. So that was helpful. And I also had to increase my crown power by various buildings, but mostly removing the privileges from the other estates. It was actually painful, more painful than EU4, so I enjoyed it, but in the end I wasn't sure if is it even worth it to go into absolutism, because absolutism in EU5, you heard the bonuses, it's not as strong as and important as it is in EU4, so it's probably not even a must-have to go for it. Moving to the last age, so Age of Revolutions. You see, I kept 1641 borders in green, so you can see the comparison, and added in light blue the borders from 100 years later, 1751. You'll notice that geographically I didn't expand much, but I very much focused on playing tall within these lands and scaling. Because you see, I did expand a little bit here in Cyrenaica. I united the rest of Egypt, Sinai, Northern Arabia was also in my hands, South Persia, West Persia, chunk of Georgia. You see the Pontic step in Crimea as well, and a bit of uniting the borders here in the Balkans. And this, combined with 100 years of gameplay, allowed me to increase my population from 26 to 46 million. So you see, geographically it wasn't much, but amount of the population in these lands and natural population growth allowed me to almost double the population. You see, location-wise, it was still 260 locations that we got, so it's almost at 1,000. And most importantly, I almost tripled my base tax from 6,000 to 14,000. That's what I mean by playing tall. And at that time, between these 2 dates, I started getting the buildings and RGOs myself again, because I realized, there's a mass expand CTA in the production tab, where it is gonna show you, okay, for this building or for general expanding RGOs, so resource gathering operations, These are the top 3 that you can click, and when you click mass expand, you can even use auto clicker. It's just gonna build it in the most efficient locations. So I just started using that because I was just so pissed off at the AI building so many forts. So income will also increase a lot, 8,000, balance 4,000, and my standing army was already of almost 500,000. And I think at that time it was between me and Bohemia still, because they also kept around 500,000 of the standing army. A few interesting things that were happening around that time. So I got revolution twice, the disaster, and not only disaster but also the actual revolution declared war on me, and I declared on all of my homelands, all of here, which was impossible to win. They actually had more base tax than me. They didn't have standing army, but they had really strong levies thanks to the revolution bonuses. So first time I did get that, I also got declared by the coalition and I quit. But then I realized, Zlewikk, why don't you just load the save, remove all of the forts in these lands that you're gonna rebel, and see if that works. And that actually worked. I managed to beat the revolution like less than a year thanks to it. I still had troubles fighting their armies. And for the coalition, at this point I realized that on that patch, coalition is absolutely useless, because you can piece it out purely for money. And you saw my income. I could just pay them 100 ducats to fuck off. Then what I realized is that after 5 years, revolution fired again, because it only gives you a few years of a pause on the revolution to happen. So in a few years I had to fight it again, and I did the same strategy. And at this point I started searching, like, okay, maybe there is some requirements that I can just use to stop revolution from firing. I did find it. I just had to stop taxing burghers and peasants so high. I had to tax them at half of capacity for revolution not to fire again. There was also colonial revolution going on, but I didn't use that situation too much because I had so many colonial nations that the UI was broken, but they did rebel more. What's worth mentioning about the colonies is that when you finish colonizing a province, you have a pop-up where you can decide, okay, do you want to keep this in your own hands? Do you want to create a new colonial nation out of that province? Or you want to add it to one of the other colonial nations around. So if it borders another colonial nation, you can add it to that colonial nation. So you have like full freedom on shaping your colonial nations. Compared to EU4, where you could still do that, right, by giving provinces, but it wasn't that clean. I also at this point realized that it's a huge issue of AI's prioritizing force so much, not only for myself, but also for the other nations. So the war has become an absolute World War I situation simulator, where you just have almost each location has a force. It's very slow to fight wars. Also, how they balance the wars is that with each age, the percentage of the wars you get from the battles is decreased. So in Age of Revolutions, you can get like 1, 2, maybe 4% war score from battles, and everything else has to come from the war goal, as well as occupations, and this occupations part is really tough with so many forts. Another issue that I had around this time is that industrialization never spawned the institution, so I was locked of all of its great advances like railways. So I couldn't get my control as high as it would be possible. So I also shared feedback that the requirements are weird because nobody in the world were fulfilling these requirements. Around that time I also unlocked a special building called Meeting Office. You know, there's a building in our game called Bailiff, which gives a lot of power to the nobility, but it also gives a local proximity source to a rural location. So that might be very strong to like for locations far away to get a higher control. In this age you unlock Minting Office, which works the same, but instead of 30 base proximity score, it gives you 40, so more. It's for urban locations and has no side effects like increase power of the nobles. There are three advances Ottomans have in this age: 10% loyalty of subjects, 0.3% monthly control, and 5% increased tax and levies. Then we also have another special units, which is Janissary columns. Okay, you see in purple right now, these were my borders at the end of the game. That's a massive expansion, right? This is because after the revolutions and the coalition, I realized coalitions are useless on that patch. You can just pay off people to fuck off. And even strong alliance chains are useless because of that. Because yes, you cannot peace out for the first 12 months of the war, separate peace, but after 12 months you can just pay money strong ally to fuck off, and I don't want anything else, just money. So use that to expand that much. You see, I got all up to the Tunis heartland, I got whole Balkans, whole Hungary, big chunk of Poland, whole steppes and South Russian terrains, but also whole Caucasia, majority of Persia, majority of Arabia were in my hands by 1805. Let me actually note that so it's also clear. This is a little bit 1751 and this is 1805. How it looks like in the statistics, you see we've reached over 100 billion of pops, over 2.2 thousand locations, 24,000 base tax, 21,000 income, 14,000 of balance, and almost a million of a standing army. Important note here, I didn't play out in the end of the game, which is 1839, because it was taking an hour to play like literally 2 years of a game. And that's because of the fort issue. I wanted to expand a lot, so I kept declaring wars, but with so many siege bonuses, so many assault bonuses, and such a big army, the wars look like this. Most of the forts of the enemies are level 2 or level 4. These forts, you just go into, you click assault. It doesn't cost anything outside just manpower, but since the forts are low level, it didn't cost me really nothing. If the fort is high level, just let it siege. So the gameplay looks like this in late game. Unpause, use objectives for the armies to focus siege, so they only focus on the forts. They reach the forts, you click assault, 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 assault to 5 different stacks or even more. Pass 3 days, get the forts done, then pass another few days to let automation to code to the new force, click assault, 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 get this done, and repeat. And just keep doing that all the time. Exhausting, right? So that's definitely something that we're gonna improve, but yeah, that was the pain. That's why I finished in 1805. Another issue is that, yes, you get Imperialis CB in late game, but it didn't work, because the requirement in game for that Imperialis was you need to be a kingdom. Not kingdom or more, you needed to be a kingdom to use it. And obviously it was an empire, so I couldn't use it. But I know that in the new version, I think they already fixed that is kingdom or higher that can use that. But I couldn't, so the only CBs that I could be using was no CB, or, which costs stab, or a goddamn parliament, which you can get every 5 years CB. So that was pain. At this point you can also integrate areas, so like, you know, getting, let's say, all of these provinces integrated at once, it makes it much faster. So with, I think, 11 cabinet members in late game, I was integrating everything fast. And I think if there were not that many forts, it would be a much more pleasant gameplay. But yeah, I got exhausted at the very end. This is it about that campaign. Let me share with you what kind of feedback I shared through a campaign with the Pyrox. And since when I'm recording it, yesterday the patch was released with some updates. But when I'm releasing that video, it's gonna be probably a few days. I shared the feedback of the forts. Not sure how it was changed yet. I didn't play that much, so I don't know. Coalitions are actually hurting. I just played yesterday as Orisa, and coalition actually now wants not only money but also your provinces or stuff to be released. And the coalition is also much more aggressive. I was declared by coalition every few years. My war exhaustion was very high, so coalitions are fixed for sure. Industrialization, I don't know. Revolution, I don't know, didn't get there. Imperialist CB, I'm pretty sure they fixed it. I've heard that AIs actually started colonizing because of the issue that I mentioned earlier. They focus on colonizing stuff around them, and New World was absolutely empty. I could colonize all for myself. And they actually reworked the sliders, because on my previous version it worked like in May, so you know, even if you have a slider at 0, you still pay some base cost for like legitimacy, army, forts, diplomacy, prestige, etc. They changed it actually that you can get slider to truly 0, so pay nothing, So how it works at the middle slider, you just don't get anything. If you get it to negative, you just get negative modifiers instead, which is a nice change. But I think it's a bit too OP now. It's not nicely balanced, meaning that you just don't pay for your army and you're more or less at 0.1, but at peace you don't care. Or even at 0, you only get less diplomats on diplomatic spending, while instead I think it should be like modifiers like increase antagonism, right, or reduce improve relations. So it actually hurts you to get sliders at 0, because right now with this change you just earn much more money, which is probably not ideal. You should exchange that money for some negative modifiers for the sliders being too low for paying for stuff. I also don't like the antagonist map mode. To be exact, on the diplomacy map mode, nations that are in coalition and nations that you're at war with, they're both red. They're a tiny little bit different shade of red, but it's unrecognizable. I also realized that on that new patch my speed works even faster. So right now 1 year in game on Observer goes for me in 30-ish seconds. It was 50-ish seconds before. That's a nice change. And yeah, I'm looking forward to play more and do more AAR videos. As told you, I'm playing Oris right now in India. I'm 150 years in. I'm having lots of fun. It's actually a much richer nation than the Ottomans, but it's really hard to expand in India because of the coalitions change. But yeah, I would definitely prepare that video. Maybe not play 500 years there, but I want probably to stop at uniting India. So that should be a pretty fun experience, and it also has some nice flavor. Not as much as Ottomans, but it is nice. So guys, let me know if you'd like to see more of this kind of videos. If you do, like this video, and of course subscribe to get notified about that future content. Bye bye.